Welcome to the Quality of Mind podcast, where you can explore the pioneering and game-changing understanding that unlocks the secret source to more productivity, peace, and potential. If you're fed up with the conventional echo chamber to personal development and human potential, and if you want to be part of the new breeders of leaders and entrepreneurs, come and explore the beforepsychology approach, enabling sustainable, wide-ranging transformation in every aspect of life and work, for exponential, not just marginal gains. Get ready to listen fresh and discover your secret source. Welcome to the Quality of Mind Transforming Business podcast series. And today's episode, we have a very regular to the show who's come to talk about the next installment in her authorship of wonderful books around the topic of non-duality or quality of mind or taste the mango, whatever you want to call it. She's very familiar to regular listeners, and to people that haven't listened to the show, I'll ask her to introduce herself. But Katrín's written a new book that was published just last week, and it is the 7th of June 2024. So Katrijn, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for wanting to talk about book 3 and 2 and 1, maybe. We'll see.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about them all. So just in case anyone in their current state of ignorance doesn't know a little bit about you, can you just give a minute or two, Katrijn, to your background? And I guess how come you've now written 3 books about a subject that not everyone writes books about?
Yeah, so I had a 20-year career in organizational development and change and, all the regular stuff. That ended when I started talking about or coaching, and then soon after writing about non-duality in organizational change and leadership. And since that was 3 years ago, and since then, I've started to spend more and more time writing and speaking with people about this, and about the non-dual understanding, if we want to call it that. And I have less and less to do with what I used to do.
Yes. And we'll talk about what the non-dual understanding is in a minute, but remind me chronologically, the first book, which one can argue is the third book, came out when?
In January 21.
Right, and that one is called Selfless Leadership. And then there was a couple of years break, and book 2, called Beyond Illusion, came out, feels like 6 to 8, 10 months ago, something like that.
A year ago.
Ago.
Kind of 1.5 years later.
Right. And then, I know what that's about in a mo. And then the most recent book, Seeing No Self, as we say, came out in June. And now you have a trilogy. Maybe before we dive into what each book's doing, for people who are new to the idea, but maybe they've heard something about your work or non-duality, what is non-duality, or what are these books about?
Well, the easiest way to say it is that it's about coming to understand, in the sense of seeing directly, that there are no separate selves, and there is really only one essential self, if you will, or one essential unity to us. Our true nature is one, and the separate entity we believe we are is an illusion.
Right. Now, that sounds nice, or maybe it doesn't, but what's that got to do with life?
Everything, because as soon as that is even partially seen or understood, it takes away the stress of trying to be someone. And most people, when they hear that, they're like, whoa, that's not stressful. But it is, since we became a self, which is around 2 years of age, it came with all the stress of trying to be a particular someone and trying to improve and trying to change the world to suit our beliefs and who we're supposed to be and meant to be, and everything else that follows on from that, which we can discuss for quite a while if we want to.
And I suppose the easiest, sometimes I find, way to give people just a little understanding or glimpse of this is to say, okay, let's take the idea of what we would call being in the zone or flow state. which people can maybe relate to. Sometimes it's talk about in sport or music or just in life. You're just in the moment doing something, whether you're cooking or dancing or chatting with a friend or running or just out for a walk. And we would have this nice, lovely feeling of just not really having any thinking about time or us. Things are just happening. There's usually a nice feeling to it. There's quite a lot of resourcefulness and clarity and resilience. And we just sort of lose ourselves in that moment, whatever it might be. Now, most people can sort of relate to that at some level, whether it happens a lot or just sparingly. Now, what we're really saying is that what we're pointing to in non-duality is to show that that flow state isn't luck or a freak or only for certain people about certain things. Actually is how any aspect of life, however thorny and prickly can be, if it wasn't for this misunderstanding about the self and thinking we're in duality. So I was just trying to give listeners there just a really practical, what do you want about type thing. Would that fit with your understanding?
Yeah, I'd add the aspect of connection. So there's even another layer to this non-dual understanding, which is the seamless connection of everything.
Yeah, and I think sometimes for me, what I might describe as, you're right, it depends what you mean by flow, but sometimes I can just lose myself in a sunset. So when I'm looking at a puppy or a flower, and actually there's no me in the world, it all becomes one. Now that sounds very trite and, oh, that's nice, but actually that's there regardless, and there's no separation. And that's because the phrase non-duality, it's a bit odd, isn't it? I think I remember when I first heard the phrase, I was like, well, why are they saying it like that? Why not just say one? Because non-duality means not both or not two. Why not just say one? What an odd way of saying it. So it's not the most helpful phrase.
No, but I guess it's in a valiant attempt to stop us from thingifying oneness. So that if we just don't call it one, but call it not two, we're all reminded that this is not actually it's not actually a thing that is one. It's just that all of this is not really separate.
Yes.
And I found that as well, that it's much, easier. It's less difficult to speak about this in the negative about what it's not than trying to explain what it is, because that's just impossible.
Yes. And even when you were saying earlier on about when we see that this is about not being a self, and everyone's like, what do you mean? Well, if you think about it, what happens from about 2 years on, as you mentioned, from 2 years old, we start getting the belief, because of an appearance and because of our conditioning of what the rest of the world's telling us, that there's a me and a world. And then we start to think this me needs to do well in the world or can do badly in the world, or this me has a limited bunch of resources. I'm good at that. I'm not good at that. And it's down to me to make the world be a good place or a bad place, or me be a good thing. All of that, we don't even notice that becomes us because it's so invisibly, innocently in the conditioning of society. So when we say you recognize there's no self and we are just part of the system, if you like, it's much easier to see the opposite of that. Because if you ask most people, well, when things aren't going well, or you're suffering, or you're lacking peace or resourcefulness, what's going on? Most people would sort of think, well, I've got a lot of thinking about what I should be doing, the past or the future. I feel a little bit low on resourcefulness. I feel like I need to control things. It all comes back to this central idea of the self. So all our suffering really comes back to one thing, which is this idea that we think we're separate. So that's why your answer to the question, what's this got to do with life, is everything. So tell me now, if we think we've done a little bit about what non-duality is, but obviously the rest of the podcast will do some more about this. Tell me about the 3 books now and how you see them now, stepping back, having written 3.
Yeah, so you said earlier that I started with what is probably the third one. So
that's just my perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, but I agree. I mean, I wrote Selfless Leadership first, which is about what a non-dual understanding would change in the world of work and collaborative leadership. And that is very much related to the coaching that I did at that time. And it's actually completely applying the understanding of there is no separate self and there is only connection to working together in a business context. And many, many people found that very helpful. I think it's actually the most bought book of the three. And at the same time, there were a lot of people also asking the question, yeah, okay, this sounds nice, but how can this possibly, how can I even entertain these concepts? You're asking me to consider that the self is an illusion. You're asking me to consider that there maybe is no doer. I can't go there. And to these people, I then said things like, yeah, but modern science, neuroscience, quantum physics, there's all this, it's not just me saying this and spiritual things, it's just modern science as well. But I had no proof. So I couldn't really explain, even though I'd heard various things. And that was why I wrote Beyond Illusion, which I would now say is the first book to read, because that's a summary of some of the neuroscience and the metaphysics and the philosophy. Spanning from Buddhist philosophy all the way to modern neuroscience, that just blows all these holes into our belief that there is a separate self. And then it's not just me saying this, but 10 world-renowned experts in their fields just explaining why the self is an illusion and there really is none.
Yeah.
So that's really for those who come to this with some skepticism and who are in the, all of us really, the way we were educated and raised, we find it very, very difficult to entertain the idea seriously that there is no self. Yes. So Beyond Illusion addressed that. And then that's all really nice, but you don't get anywhere with a non-dual understanding if you don't discover it in direct experience. And you and I do a lot about that, because otherwise this is just theory. Something you could discuss with your very nerdy uncle at a party, but it's not something that would change your life in any way. And until you inquire. And that's why the third, so just the recently published book is not, it's even hard to call it a book. It's basically an instruction manual with the 33 inquiries that helped me the most. And in all these 3 years of guiding people through this, that are most mind-blowing, that are most paradigm changing in the sense of seeing directly in our own firsthand experience that how this self concept is created, and therefore also how it's deconstructed, and then what is left, right? Because we don't disappear when we see there's no self, we're still here. And what is it then that we are if we're not a self? Yes.
And we'll get into that in a bit. So just to overview on the 3 books. So Selfless Leadership is all about the implications for the workforce and being a leader if and once someone has recognized what we're calling non-duality. But some people go, well, I can't even go there because it's just so far away from what I currently have been taught and believe about the world. Then Beyond Illusion, that book comes in and it starts to show how we've innocently and visibly got it wrong, just as we got it wrong that the sun goes round us or the earth is flat. We've got this wrong too. And that book shows how that science is starting to catch up to that. And mystics and spiritual philosophers over time have known, but science is starting to catch up. So Beyond Illusion does a beautiful job of showing our conceptual minds, our thinky minds, oh, I need to take this seriously. This isn't just all waffle, right? There's proper evidence if we need that. And then we might have read those 2 books and still go, yeah, but I don't really know. It's not really turning up for me. I kind of recognize it and know it, and and it makes sense to me, but it's not really turning up. And then Seeing No Self is the guide book or the instruction manual of how to see this directly for yourself, So it stops being intellectual understanding and you start to see it through direct inquiry. And there's some lovely, a whole melange of exercises in there. And, you know, sometimes it takes one or it takes 44 of these. It doesn't make any difference. And, but they're just a different selection of ways to see it in real time, in direct experience. So now we've got the full suite of books. One's talking about implications of the workplace. One is sort of showing the intellectual mind that it's okay to start to inquire into this, and you're not going to be, you know, you're not wrong. And then the third book is some sort of how to see it directly, which is where the rubber really hits the road, I guess. And that's why one could argue that the first book should be in the last book and other way around, because I'll ask you this question: if because I know the answer depends on the person and where they're at the moment. But if you could only have written one book right now, right? Let's assume you had to delete two, and everything of the old two would be dismantled. Which one would you leave on the market?
Yeah, definitely the last one.
Yeah,
so most recent one. But I want to mention that Selfless Leadership does have 16 inquiries in it. So it is actually, it's a self-coaching I mean, it's also a workbook, but Seeing No Self, so the direct inquiry one, is much more comprehensive, because that's also something that I found, and you as well, I know, that many people get stuck in different aspects of this. So what I like about, or what I discovered from talking to all these people over 3 years, is that so for example, this idea of doership, of being the author of my thoughts and my life and making decisions, is a very, very sticky one. And this was so sticky and so obvious that it's already in Selfless Leadership. It's a whole chapter that we're being lived, we're not the doer. But over the course of all this guiding, I realized that there was also this aspect of much more subtle, this sense of being a separate self. And so this basic belief, I am a self, and that there are ways to look at that and to deconstruct that then make it much easier for the whole thing, you know, to collapse.
Yes. Totally get that. So if I use the metaphor of the Jenga blocks, if you know the tower game where you have to build these things and you pull bits off, sometimes you can pull bits off, but the tower's still standing.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, okay. So even though I've seen bits of this, and then the most surprising piece sometimes falls out, and then you're like, oh, the whole thing has collapsed. And I think that's why there's possibly 33 inquiries, because for different people, different ones are more sticky in terms of how their conditioning's gone. So I think pulling apart the different pieces helps you see Selfish Leadership. So my guess is that if someone had read Selfless Leadership, then went and read Seeing No Self, and went back to read Selfless Leadership, they'd go, oh, right, they'd see it fresh. So if people were asking, okay, where do I start, which book, there's a sort of theoretical answer to that, isn't there? But really it does depend on where someone's at, right? I think my sense when someone asks me a question like that, I'd go, well, what seems to be the barrier at the moment? And if it's kind of like, well, I don't think this can be accurate, look what science says, and then you go to Beyond Illusion first. And then that might open the door for Seeing No Self. Or you can just try Seeing No Self and you think it's a load of old bonkum, go back to the other ones and then come back to it. So there's lots of entry points, isn't there, for people now?
Oh yeah, and I mean, maybe they're not even these books at all, because that's also something that I've, as a unique body-mind construct, I have my own style. And that's also something that's become clear over the years, that it doesn't resonate with everyone. So it can't, you know, because I have specific ways of wording things or writing things, and I have a specific style of inquiry as well, the way I wrote Seeing No Self, which is for certain types of people, and it won't work for those who feel resistance to that.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I mean, I know when I when I started my coaching career 25 years ago, I kind of looked at a lot of the let's call it spiritual stuff, and it just didn't do much for me.
No.
I thought it was kind of nice for a Sunday afternoon, but I could not see the relevance. Now, I don't think I particularly came across it in the right way, and in the people I listened to, they were very esoteric and full of hyperbole and triteness. So it, but I also couldn't see the relevance for the real world, if you want to call it that, day to day. I see the opposite now, of course. So it's what I suppose the reason I'm saying that is that if something doesn't make sense on one day, it doesn't mean it won't make sense a day later, a week later, or a year later. So let's just go back upstream a little moment and answer a question, which is, and regular listeners would have heard us talk about this, and they might know our other brand where we talk about this as well, called Taste the Mango. But why are you and I so convinced that this is the thing people will really, really benefit from seeing, and actually the world needs to see? And there's a lot of beautifully innocent misdirection when it comes to how we as human beings can experience more peace, performance, and potential, and work more harmoniously as a society and a world. What is it that this has that maybe other things in personal, professional development, human potential don't?
Yeah, so the absolute, I don't know how to put it. The thing that makes this so powerful is that it goes all the way upstream to what it is that we essentially are. And everything else we can discuss about self-improvement, even mindset, working on your beliefs, all this other stuff is within the cage of the separate self. And so if we work from the hypothesis that maybe let's just say maybe perhaps the separate self is an illusion, if we're sitting there in that illusion, trying to work on an illusion, if that hypothesis is even possibly true, we're wasting our time. And so what inquiry does is it takes you to a position, and this is just a manner of speaking because there are no positions, but it takes us to a position from where we can actually see the whole thing and observe the illusion trying to work on itself. So we go to the widest possible perspective, which of course has the biggest lever, because
it's like Elon Musk always says, you work from first principles. So you go as high up the stream as you can to work on the biggest leverage point. And then the other little metaphor that sometimes pops in my mind is if you're going out for a hike or in the car, and you've got your GPS on and you're navigating, assuming the GPS is accurate, right? Your compass is accurate. If you make that assumption and you keep getting lost and you don't think, I better check whether there's a magnet near my compass or whether my GPS is accurate, because we're using our psychological minds, our self minds, to try and navigate the world of personal, professional development, mental health, whatever it is, not recognizing that the very instrument we're using could be the problem.
Yes. So we use the self to work on the self.
Yeah.
From the idea that the self is already an entity and something that can do something.
Yeah, I've had that various things. I've been trying to measure something. Actually, it was some blood tests and kept getting these very odd readings. And I was like, oh, well, that's that. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? And then I realized the meter was faulty.
Yeah.
Right. And it was a relief to know, oh, this isn't me. I was testing my blood sugar and my cholesterol, and I was like, gosh, I'm off the charts here. What's wrong with me? And then I realized that my methodology for the metering was wrong. So
we can't solve our psychology from within our psychology. We can't leave the cage by rearranging the furniture in the cage.
Yeah.
And inquiry goes, just moves out of the cage, moves out of the psychology.
Yes. And that's why I call it before psychology. That's the phrase I use to try and say we can't solve our psychology from inside our psychology. We have to look at it before our psychology. Now, that, of course, anyone semi-smart might go, yeah, but given we are a psychology, how do you even do that? Well, our best attempt is what we call direct inquiry, which is what the Seeing No Self book is a lot about. So let's just spend a minute or two on defining what we mean by the mechanism of direct inquiry.
It's really based on the principle that whatever is going on, let's call it in the content of our lives. So the whole the experience we have, the sensations, the thoughts, the feelings. This is about recognizing that there is always something that is aware of that.
But just before you give the answer, sorry, the what we might recognize, the mechanism of direct inquiry, how is that different to using our psychology to work out our psychology?
Yeah, and that is what, because there is always this awareness of, it is actually going there to this awareness, which is outside of the psychology. It is what is aware of psychology, and using that position to inquire into what the psychology is. So we're taking, it's moving to this larger than position, and then using direct observation without referencing the psychology. So without thinking about it, and this will happen anyway, but without relying on that.
Yeah. And yeah, so people might be thinking, how, what does that mean? So, and people can try this right now. What normally happens when we examine a piece of reality? So let's just take whatever you're doing now, listeners, right? Katrijn and I tend to be are staring into a screen and a microphone. Whatever you're doing, if we ask you just, become aware of, what's going on right now, normally what we'd say is, well, I can see a screen. I've got some thoughts in my head about what I'm going to do later. I'm wondering what Katrijn's thinking. Oh yeah, I can see my hands. We would point to all the content of our psychology, wouldn't we? That would be very, very normal. And whatever you're doing now, listeners, that's what you'd normally do. And you'd probably have some thoughts about that too. Oh, it's going well, it isn't going well, I'm cold, I'm hot, blah, blah, blah. Why is he asking me that question? We'd have some thoughts about that. Beautifully normal. Now, we're saying when we do the direct inquiry, although all that's going on, absolutely great. Don't bother, don't worry about that, whether that's going on or not. There's another piece of that experience to also notice, which is nothing that will have come from anything learnt, like a belief or a thought judgment or anything like that. It's almost the rawest, most neutral noticing that you could do without any preconditioned idea of what it means, good or bad. And it's just that raw noticing that there is something else other than the coming and going of content, which we can't really see because we get so distracted by the content itself. So, and the thoughts about that content. So we're going back to what is always there rather than comes and goes, and is nothing to do with anything we've learned, previously known, or anything like that. It's just pure raw now, and it's very kind of bland in a way, you could call it, but it's the thing that's always there.
Yeah, so we're looking at the noticing. We're noticing the noticing itself, and using that as the reference point to then look at all this content and the psychology and deconstruct it to find out, is that really essentially part of me, or is that just something that comes and goes and is constantly changing? So we're looking for the unchangeable and moving away or deconstructing what is changeable.
And that's the fascinating bit. So we asked the question, what is it that never comes and goes? What is it that's eternal, universal, and consistent? And that's where sneakily our conditioned mind jumps to assumptions that are learnt rather than notices it directly. Because most people, if you ask that question, what is it about us that comes and doesn't come and go, that's eternal and consistent, they'll say something along the lines of me, or my brain, or my body. Now, what we're saying is, hold fire, Mo. How do you know you're a me or got a body? Oh, I just know. It doesn't. I can see it. I mean, it's always there. Is it? Is it always there, or is it a thought and a perception that, however consistent, actually comes and goes? And that's the direction inquiry goes, rather than going along with the assumption that it starts with a brain or a me, because it doesn't. Because those just to take those two things, the brain, the me, and the body, those three things, they are in the coming and going category, not the always there category.
Yeah, and that's what sounds like a lot in just these few sentences. And that's what I found is really, really helpful, as we do in the Taste the Mango videos, and I also do in the book, is to take it in rings of the onion and to peel it layer by layer, because otherwise, the mind just goes, well, yeah, of course I exist, go away.
Yeah.
So it's helpful to kind of trick it in a way, by taking this nice and slow and very structured, although really on another level, you could say all of that is nonsense, because there's really nothing, it's just awareness. We're it already. You should be able to, you can see that in a flash. Yes, but the mind doesn't really do that unless we get some guidance.
Exactly. And it's a little bit like if you're teaching a toddler to ride a bicycle. You run behind them for quite a long time, holding the back and doing all that stuff, and you do all this. They don't actually need that, because balance works kind of okay, with momentum. But it's like a guardrail, isn't it? So almost what you're doing in, particularly in Seeing No Self, with the 33 mini exercises, is just poking away at that meta thing that we just talked about. And most people, they find some don't do anything, and some, oh wow, I saw it there, and then the next time around you go, well, that one worked and that one didn't. So that's why there's 30, because you could say 33. Oh my gosh, what have I got to do 33 for? That sounds like a lot, but it's not really 33. I mean, well,
no, well, you could say it's always the same thing, just from different aspects. And I mean, I know books where there are like 100 inquiries, so this is the lean version. But I think it's important in the sense that when you read books on non-duality, or you hear people speaking about this, they usually either accentuate either the negative side, we're not a self, there's only emptiness, you are not your thoughts, you are not your feelings, you are not your body. And people can end up feeling kind of scared almost of the void. I'm going to fall into nothingness. And that's very much the Eastern Zen, some of those approaches. And then there are more the awareness approaches, which are with, we're all one, we're God, we're love. It's all unity, and tends to go into the the rainbows and the flowers. I'm exaggerating, but and people can get stuck there as well, because now they still feel like a separate self, but now they feel one with everything. So it's just the mind convincing itself. And both of these on their own are unhelpful, I feel. That's what I see. And it's the beauty of the power of the approach is when you combine both.
Yes.
And you dance in both directions. So it's not just, okay, first we're going to deconstruct anything, and then, when you're swimming in the void of nothingness, then we'll throw you a lifeline and say, no, you are everything. We're going to look at both at the same time. You are both nothing and everything.
And I think you're very agnostic to any particular traditions or rituals or teachers or whatever, whether that's the neti or whatever, and you're just blending neutrally, a combination. And I think accidentally in the past, non-duality, spirituality, whatever you want to call it, has become quite esoteric. The language feels inaccessible or weird. So all of your books are beautifully accessible in at least the language. what they're pointing to may not feel always accessible, but in the way that you've debunked it, of anything, any barriers to entry, any sort of you don't have to like, oh, I have 20 years of purging myself before I can do this. It's making it very open source, democratized, accessible for any single human being. You don't need to be smart. Actually, it probably helps if you're not. I suppose Beyond Illusion's got a bit of that in, where, you need to look at the intellectualness of it, but the inquiry exercises, children are much better at than adults. So I think that's the advantage of your style, is it's very accessible and non-traditionally spiritual, or, because you're just trying to make it as easy as possible for people.
Yeah, and there are no descriptions. So one of the things that really annoys me about some of the non-dual writing or speaking is that there's a lot of description of what this is, but there's very little, and how do I see that? So then we have the two camps. Well, there's no you, so there's nothing to do, so just give up, forget it. You can't do anything, but I've seen it and it's beautiful, but I'm not going to tell you how to see it because there's no one who can do that. And then there's the other side that, well, this is beautiful and I've seen it, but it's going to take you 30 years of meditating. And
yes. And I think that's now the only slight downside of that no description is that it's possible for people to go, because what that might be missing for some people is there's no benefit, because you're not describing how beautiful the roses and flowers are. So I guess what I would say to people is, because most people want to do something for a benefit, right? That's just seems to be our conditioning. Is why bother invest some money in this book, or some time reading this book, or invest in a coach or whatever? What am I going to get out of it? I mean, some people will just do it because they don't need to have that, but a lot of people go, well, what's the point? Or they'll be looking for something to fix themselves. Now, you for the reasons you just said, avoid getting too much into, hey, when you experience this, it'll be like this, or it'll be like that, right? Because it's distracting from the absolute clarity of the how. But as we said at the beginning, this can change. This, because it's so upstream, because it's at first principles, it can have implications for absolutely everything in life and work forever for anyone. And I don't say that in a trite hyperbole way. I mean, for me, I've been messing around and coaching for 25 years, and it's only the last sort of 5-10 years that I've realized that that's true from what I can see. So although trying to blend in, oh, you're going to get this and this out of it, can dilute the pureness of the seeing. So, but you just have to take, I guess, that at faith that this could be valuable, if that matters to you, right? Some people just see it as just, they get magnetized by the truth of this and they just get sucked in, they don't care. But some people will want to go, well, I'm only going to bother reading these blooming books if there's something in it for me. Anything you want to say or add on that?
Yeah, so not to worry, I do have 10 pages I just counted on the why. But it is very, very lean for that reason, because there is something, and maybe that's just the way I present it to the world, but I'm convinced that if you come with too many expectations and too many whys, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot, so it's you're creating barriers to actually inquiring.
Because it's a seeker.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think you can't see what is if you're expecting something.
Exactly. And I think it's funny, isn't it? Because, and I've spoken to a few authors who have publishers, and they often have an argument about the title, because but even though you've got 9 pages, 10 pages on the why, your title isn't the ultimate key to happiness, be happy now. It's not that, right? It says on the title, it says seeing no self. Most people would go, sorry, what next? Right. Yeah. So, and the reason publishers write on the front cover, the last book you ever need to be happy, right? Is because our seeking mind likes that. Now, the paradox, the irony, whatever you want to call it, is it's harder to see something when you're seeking.
Yeah. And that's the reason that I'm very clear that this is a book for the, either the extremely frustrated seekers who have come to the point where, okay, none of this stuff is working.
I don't care about the title. Just give me
I
something.
don't care about the title. I need the hardcore stuff. Or those who are just so curious that they fall into this, they fall down the rabbit hole of non-duality and then find this and can't stop. And I realize that's a very, very small group, and I don't care.
I mean, listeners, it could be called, this book, as we nicknamed Taste the Mango, The Ultimate Hack, The Essential Realization. It could be called that. So if you want to call it that, call it that. But when you inquire, try and leave all your what am I going to get out of this behind. That would be my top tip. So if that's possible, have a crack at it without trying to get anything out of it.
Yeah, and just to make sure that happens, I spend the first 30 pages, telling you to let go of your expectations and all the reasons why.
Yeah, true.
But
now,
that's an experience.
Now, when we were chatting earlier, I said, right, we can also talk on the podcast about the other books you're going to write, or the other books you could write. And you looked at me with a face that went, what are you on about? Partly because you're in the kind of post-traumatic black hole of having just published a book, but that will pass because the system's clever like that. Because I've got lots of ideas of books for you, and you might notice I'm very good at having ideas of books for you rather than writing anything myself. Have you noticed I'm good at that? So I've got ideas, but what do you think if there was a version of Katrijn, that avatar Katrijn, that was going to write another book? What do you think would complement this trilogy?
I really, at the moment, I have no idea, because when you said that to me, I was so shocked, because I feel like there's nothing that I could ever write anymore, apart from maybe a novel about sheep or something, but or something, or some really bad poetry, but
Right. Well, okay. I hadn't thought about the sheep one, but I suppose for me, if you're creating a suite of these lovely books, and everything is in every book, but that aside, right? There's probably one more at the front end, which is something like, what's the problem with me in the world, and what's the solution? What's the point?
yeah.
Right. So it's a little bit like we just spoke. It's framing all of this, pointing to the innocent problem, if we can use that word, or limitation, shall we say, with the current way personal, professional development, mental health is set up.
Yeah.
So it might, and I know you put some of that in all the books, right? But it would be the front end book, which, so it could be, if you like, the prologue, but it'd be a long one, but so it'd be its own book. You've got that end, and a lovely book there. And then just, you've done Selfless Leadership, which is all about implications for the workplace, but you could do a series of books about implications for other aspects of life and work. So it could be mental health, it could be relationships, it could be sports performance, money, like Selfless Leadership, where it's, so there's a whole range of them. So I'm going to give you a day off, and then it's assume on Monday you'll start one of these. That's what I see. That there's one more at the front end, and then there's a whole selection of books. And then, of course, by the time you've done those, Beyond Delusion, science will have evolved, and you'll need to rewrite Beyond Delusion, updated version.
Okay, remind me not ever to talk to you again.
Yeah. Okay, there we are. This is the last time Katrijn's going to be on the show. So, I'm genuinely in awe of your ability to produce these books in the way you do. And I think your articulation, particularly as a multilingual person, to be able to bang these books out is phenomenal. And I'm so grateful that you do, because it makes my job as a coach easier, because I can just go and read Katrijn's book. There's probably some bias in me suggesting that you increase your prolificness. But I think the more that people start to see, because although this is completely transformatively pervasive, it is quite interesting how we can only see it in certain bits to start with.
Yeah.
Which is just an interesting feature of the human system. But really the benefit footprint of this is ridiculously broad, because it's the one central ripple that will hit everything in the human experience.
Yes. And to be honest, you've just got me with that, the end of self-help books, the first one.
Brilliant. I hope you're going to write that one. Yes.
Right. That really is, stop mucking about with the furniture in the cage.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. And the more we see, this is just a personal perspective now on society, but the more I look at the way society's heading, it's heading further in. Well, there's you see both movements, but there's probably a lot heading towards a deification of the self. What I kind of like more re-emphasizing this illusion that the self is separate. Social media really doesn't help. The way our kids think they need to be this, that, or the other, the way they're constantly looking for validation, the way the school education academic system is, the way our politicians behave. Oh my word. It's all further emphasizing this illusion we are separate. Now, there are little pockets absolutely of the opposite. And we love those, and you can see those starting to sprout. So I suppose what we want to do is put fertilizer on those and put some weed killer on the other stuff, because otherwise it looks like society could carry on going the wrong way for a bit before I mean, it will self-correct, because I guess that's just what the system always does. It's just, which era you're alive in, and do our thing. So yeah, does it look like that to you, that a lot of society is sort of slightly heading the wrong way?
Yeah, it's yes, I talk about this all the time. The shortest version of that is the circle of control is empty, and we keep putting everything in this stupid circle of control, and soon the whole world will be in the circle of my control. And that's just crazy, because there's nothing in there.
And by circle of control, if listeners haven't seen that, it's where some sort of ostensibly helpful way is to decide what is within your control and what isn't. So can I control the weather? No. So we put that outside the circle of control. Can you control how happy you are tomorrow? Oh yeah, you can do that, right? Can you control whether you eat broccoli or French fries? Yes, you can control that. Now, spoiler alert, what the three books that Katrín's written say is, no, you can't, right? We're all part of the system. Any thought you have about whether to have broccoli or French fries is coming through the system. There's no separate me having that thought. There's no separate chooser. So there's nothing inside the circle of control. So trying to put more stuff in it's not very sensible, because it's not based on how the system works. And it's going to set you up for a fall, because you're just going to get annoyed when you can't control the things you're told you should be able to control, like your mindset or your diet. So that's what the circle of control is. So is there anything else you want to say about the experience of writing this book compared to the others, or anything else you'd like to say to encourage people to pick up a book or two or three?
Yeah, I'd say if you're interested in, ultimately you have to find out for yourself. So nothing we say, nothing I write, nothing you write, if you do someday write a book, it will also not help, because it is not about the words. Even seeing no self, although you could say it's just a list of bullet points, because this is literally a list of questions and considerations to go through one by one. So it's not even, it's more like a bullet point list and not a book. But so the whole thing is not about the words, it's about what they're pointing to. And this is my best and was the most difficult thing to do, is to have a whole book that only points. So that tries in every single word, in there's not a sentence too much in there, I hope, because it is all just pointing, asking you to look. And I tried my very best to include nothing that the self can grasp onto, but to just keep kicking that, that stool from under your feet. Anything that you think you can rest the self on, to kick it up from under you.
Yeah.
So it's not a book that's nice to read. It's horrible to read, and grammar sucks, because it's all passive voice and the weirdest constructions to point to no self. So any editor would probably have a heart attack. But I think, and well, I'm quite convinced from all the pointing and all the guiding I've done, and this is tested stuff with many, many people. It's the closest thing to what works.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to state that because words are not the right way to get people to see this, because they're beyond words, right?
Yeah.
So you've taken this idea of a book, and you have to write it in a non-book-like way to help people. And also that point about no concessions. What I mean is, you don't want to give people anything to grab onto. So the metaphor would be when you're teaching someone that they can float, if you chuck anything in the water, they'll grab onto it. And many self-help books or spiritual self-help books, including some very popular, well-known authors, will either on purpose or not on purpose, don't know, who knows, or there's no purpose, you know what I mean? But either knowingly or not knowingly, add in these concessions, which kind of feel they might be helpful because you're like, oh, okay, but actually ultimately aren't. So this is, the phrase that pops in when you say, that the medicine doesn't taste very nice, right?
Mm.
But it's not, it doesn't taste nice, actually. It's just unconventional. So, my view is that direct inquiry is not hard at all. It's just not what we're used to. And it doesn't take long if you give it a little go. And then we've got a lot of Taste the Mango videos, how-to videos on this, for it to be less weird and less unconventional. And then you're like, oh yeah, of course, I can understand why the book's written like this. But if you come at it with a frame of, this is what a book should be, as you say, an editor would go, oh my gosh, it's not well written. You're going to be surprised, if not annoyed. But once you start to see what it's trying to do, it makes a lot more sense, and roll with it. So you're absolutely right. It's not a book you read in a normal way. No. That's why it's probably a guide or something like that. I mean, the bookness of it is because it's got like a cover and a front and an end and pages and stuff. So I think that's worth noticing for people. And I love the way that you're really bad at self-promoting the book. You're basically saying, no, it's horrible. It's horribly written. Don't do this. Whereas most people in the PR campaign would go, no, it's a great book. But I think the reason it's so good is because of those things.
Yeah, it's not a great book. It's a horrible book. It's the red pill that Morpheus offers Neo. So would probably be a well-written book in this case. A nice, flowing novel with beautiful descriptions and some poetic sentences. And this has none of that. So
what might be happening for listeners right now is that the way we've discussed it in this way, there might be some intrigue or curiosity. It's Marmite, this, so it's polarizing. So either you're like, oh my God, I don't want to do that. Or there's a little bit of the mind going, I wonder what that is. And I would say the biggest tip I could give anyone if they were to pick up a book would be to carry on with that intrigue. Almost lower the bar and thinking, well, I don't, what is it? What can I see from this? Just go in neutrally, but actually do it though. And then this is really key. So by neutral, I don't mean apathetic, which is, I'm just going to think about the questions she's written, the 33 things. Don't think about them, actually explore them with curiosity, because it sounds stupid, isn't it? But you actually have to do it for it to work, rather than, no, I thought about the question, didn't do anything for me. Well, of course it didn't. It's not designed to do anything if you think about it, because you're still in psychology. It won't work. It's like you're in the boat thinking about swimming and you go, I didn't get wet. Well, you didn't get in the water. No, but I thought about getting in the water. No, you didn't. Or you looked at the menu in a restaurant, still hungry. You didn't actually eat anything. No, but I really examined the menu. So it sounds stupid to have to tell people that, because of course you're going to do what the book says, but you don't, do you? People don't.
No, I didn't for 10 years.
Yeah, but you thought you were.
Oh, no, I didn't. Yeah, I thought I was reading, I was thinking, I just didn't look.
So there's a difference, and the book explains the difference of this between thinking about the questions in the inquiry and actually directly exploring. And that's what we talked about earlier. But it's you can't underestimate how that might catch you out. So, Katrijn, anything final you'd like to add to this book promotion podcast episode?
No, if you're interested, I'm happy. Try it. And if you're not a book person, we have videos as well on Taste the Mango. So not everybody's a book person.
Yeah.
But he likes to come to this through reading. But I think we need all these versions.
Yes.
So that's why a book was also necessary.
Absolutely. So listeners, I'll put the link to the books in the show notes, and the Taste the Mango videos, which is just a YouTube channel and a Substack. Have a go. If you've got any questions, I know Katrijn's very generous with the time. Me too. I love helping people with this stuff, pointing to what you can't see, et cetera, about this stuff. But all I want to say is, firstly, thank you for coming on the show, but more importantly, thank you for writing the third book, because I think it's great and it's only going to make things easier and better for people. So thank you.
Cool. Thank you for the conversation.
You're more than welcome. So listeners, as usual, have fun being curious, and catch you next time.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast and want to know more, check out our website at qualityofmind.biz. And also, feel free to reach out and leave us a review or a comment. Until next time, have fun being curious.